This is land. This is financial speculation. Something we do with kinky.
Quack, 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 quack. Quack, 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 quack. Quack, 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 quack.
Honk, 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 honk. What's your money?
That would be weird.
Ha, 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 ha. Ha, 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 ha. Let's see. I eat bars of soap for breakfast. I love bars of soap. After midnight, things get weird.
Quack, quack. Oh no.
Let it go. Let it go. Cock.
I like that one. Quack, 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 quack.
Come on, ducks. All right, and welcome to Land Speculation on YouTube. Let me know, guys, if the audio is working all right. You are listening to Bible Stream Part 2. This is going to be an exciting stream tonight. We're going to dig into the book of Genesis and do our best to dissect what I guess would be some of the most consequential stories in like the history of the entire universe, I guess. So anyway, if you missed our part 1 of our Bible Stream series, in which we did our best to basically introduce the Bible and make some heads and tails of what this book is all about, the most consequential book in human history by almost any objective standard, much less the sort of faith standard. We're going to dig in today and talk about the book of Genesis here in part 2 as we actually start to kind of dig in step by step through the actual content of the Bible. We're going to try to do this in sort of a real talk fashion. I'm going to be feeling this out along with you guys, so bear with us. I know a lot of people have reached out to me with a lot of enthusiasm and passion for this series, as well as for their own thoughts about the Bible itself. And I really appreciate that. I've got a lot of thoughts from people. It's going to really help us, I think, dig into some of these different components of the Bible. Anyway, that's what's on tap here tonight. We're going to see how far we can dig into the book of Genesis. Maybe we'll finish it, and maybe we won't. As I was digging through some of this, I realized how much is in this first book of the Bible. So anyway, that's what's on deck here. I appreciate you guys joining us here out of the gate. I know we said we would be on, one of the nights this week, and sometimes we're not super specific about that. So thanks for bearing with us and finding us. We've got some folks here in the chat out of the gate already. We've got Quiet Castle, we've got Jeanette, we've got Jaws. Congratulations, you're the medal winners here tonight. Timmy Tushu is with us. John Johnson. That's a lot of Johns. Let's see. We got James Games, Hot Dog Baloney, here with us in the chat, and presumably millions of others watching from around the world. If you guys wouldn't mind, out of the gate, as we are getting started, dropping a like on the video and a subscribe on the channel if you're not already. Those likes obviously help us out with YouTube and the YouTube algorithm. We're always striving to do our best on the YouTube algorithm, so if you wouldn't mind dropping a like, you can take it back later if you don't like it. And make sure you're subscribed, of course. If you're not subscribed, get subscribed. And if you're subscribed, make sure you turn on your notification bell so you know when we're on. Also, as you know, the Discord is always available for kind of long-form chat after the fact and anytime. And, then, of course, we got the Duck Fund, which is our PayPal link if you want to support the stream. So we appreciate all the contributions and all that kind of stuff. We got Will Buddick has joined us here in the chat here as well. So anyway, lots of folks here, lots of highs and hellos, a couple carrots getting traded here in the chat. Jaws, one more week in Arizona before getting to go back home. Well, this is probably a good time of year to be in Arizona as any. It's going to get hot there pretty soon, but probably pretty nice in Arizona this time of year. So, I don't know, should we just kind of dig in here? So we did ask a poll question about the book of Genesis. Genesis, of course, is the first book of the Bible. So the Bible is 783,000 words, give or take, depending on which version you read. And if you want all the stats on, like, the Bible, how big it is, how many books there are, how they're organized, what that all sort of means historically, what years it covers, go back and watch our intro stream about the Bible from last week. I think it was hopefully useful. Even if you're well acquainted with the Bible, which I know many of you guys are, I hope that will be useful. But we've asked a couple of poll questions. And one of the poll questions we asked at the very beginning of all this was, of course, what you guys think about the Bible in general. And about this is as of 10 months ago anyway. About half of the respondents said that they do believe the Bible is the sacred Holy Scripture, the inspired Word of God. The rest of the responses here are kind of split between people saying like, yeah, I really appreciate the historical importance of the Bible, and then a few people saying like, I really don't actually believe much of what's in the Bible, but at any rate, it's probably interesting. Hopefully, if you're here. Hopefully, if you're here, it's interesting to you. So we're going to try to be, of course, respectful, as always, of different, sentiments about what's in the Bible. Obviously, this is tremendously impactful and significant material. So we're going to try to be dutiful to that. We dig into Genesis. We did today, or I guess yesterday, ask you guys in a poll question on the channel what your favorite stories are out of the book of Genesis. And it seemed like it's kind of a split decision so far on the voting there. The Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve, all that stuff is kind of the lead vote getter right now. We'll talk a little bit about that. We're going to talk about the creation story, which was in second place, the flood with Noah's Ark, and everything else that happens in the book of Genesis here as we dig in. So again, hopefully this will all be interesting here as we dig into the first and arguably most significant book in the Bible, that of course being the book of Genesis. This is not the logo of the actual book of Genesis. The actual book of Genesis, the term Genesis means origin, which I guess makes sense. It's the very first book. But this is actually the logo for the car brand Genesis. And Mrs. Land and I were at the auto show this past weekend. And we actually got to sit in a few Genesis cars, which I didn't realize are like fancy Hyundais. And they're actually really nice. Like, those are really nice cars. So anyway, little plug. They're not a sponsor. They could be if they wanted to be. But this is what we're digging into here tonight, the book of Genesis. So a couple of caveats here as we dig in. Number one, as we dig into the book of Genesis, we, of course, cannot cover everything. People have reached out to me with, like, this is my favorite story or my favorite passage. There is so much in the Bible And that was my original first thought, was like, well, let's just read the entire thing. And there's just too much content to cover everything. We can't read the entire Bible. So we're going to try to hit some highlights as we go. And if you guys have other things you want to point out here along the way, please do let us know. Second thing, I am not a biblical scholar. Believe it or not. Of all the potential professions that I might have, I'm not a biblical scholar. Although we've done a fair amount of research and reading here. You guys might know more than I do. So, please chime in with what you know that I don't know. But also please be, consider the fact that this is all just we're just trying to like dig through this together and sort of sort it out in the land speculation style here on YouTube. And then, of course, the third point to reinforce, of course, we all have different beliefs and sort of levels of kind of investment and dedication to the Bible. So please, take everything we say with the sort of grain of understanding that we're kind of coming at this from a perspective of trying to sort of satisfy a lot of different people here. So anyway, the book of Genesis is, of course, in some way it's the sort of easiest book to frame because it is the very first book in the entire Bible. The book of Genesis is pretty darn important in the book of Bible, in the Bible. It is basically the book that sort of starts all of the Old Testament histories that basically trace, the earth from like the beginning of time, like the creation of the entire earth, which is pretty significant, all the way through 17 books of history, which take us back to about 500 BC. That's like the end point of those histories, talking about the sort of history of the nation of Israel as it emerged from Abraham and all of his descendants. So the book of Genesis is pretty darn important. It basically establishes how God's relationship with the world gets established. It talks about making some sense of like how we even got here. We're all just kind of like living on this planet. And if we didn't have, if you think about it, like if you're one of the early people of history, you're just sort of trying to figure out like, what the hell are we doing here? That's kind of a hard thing to figure out. So there's a lot of kind of just trying to make sense of the world, I think, that happened in Genesis. And then it sort of pivots into like the history of the nation of Israel. We'll talk a little bit about that because it's sort of Genesis itself, like even though it's one book out of 66, itself in a way is kind of like two different books. A lot of talk about like promises and blessings and sort of setting up God's kind of unusual relationship with man, which, takes some sorting out along the way. A few efforts to kind of like get it right, and then, maybe realizing things weren't quite right, and then having to reset, and all kind of stuff like that. So it's, you even feel like in the book of Genesis, God's trying to sort of feel things out a little bit. Genesis is the third longest book of the Bible. There's a lot in it. It's kind of amazing in a way, actually, it's not the longest book. But when we get to Psalms and then Jeremiah, we'll try to delve into why exactly those are longer. But the book of Genesis is a long book, 32,000 words. That's longer than a lot of, actual books. And a lot of really, really, really famous stories in the book of Genesis. We ran this proprietary algorithm, just kind of averaging different rating systems across the internet. The book of Genesis is the highest ranked book in the Bible in terms of like when people say this is my favorite book, Genesis is like number one, beating out basically all the Gospels. Maybe it's kind of tied with Matthew there, but anyway, Genesis is important. It's important. It's a good read. There's a lot of bang for your buck in Genesis. Obviously a lot of really significant stories, and we'll try to delve into as many of them as we can here, starting with creation, the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel, Noah's Ark, the Tower of Babel, Abraham getting called, the binding of Isaac, which we'll talk about, and then Jacob and Joseph and all that kind of stuff, before eventually, spoiler alert, the Israelites get enslaved at the end of the book of Genesis. And that kind of sets up what happens in further histories within the Bible. So, we'll talk about that here as we dig in. I see people making notes here in the chat. Book of Genesis, the early books in the Bible, basically are more like a synthesis of older texts and oral tradition. They aren't really books, says Bequeathius. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I asked ChatGPT. ChatGPT said the book of Genesis is traditionally attributed to Moses, but probably the book of Genesis, at least especially the first part of the book of Genesis, is probably much more an amalgamation of a lot of stories and kind of allegories that were told among people of these sort of early days of human civilization. A lot of this, how did we get here? And a lot of this was passed down orally. We know, because we know a lot of the first scrolls weren't created until significantly later, that a lot of these early stories basically had to kind of be passed through the oral tradition. And you know what happens when you try to pass things through the oral tradition. You can go very quickly in a game of telephone from saying one thing to it becoming something very different. On the other hand, sometimes when things get passed around a group of people, it all kind of gets synthesized and the story can actually get better and better and better and better. So I guess it'll be up to you guys to decide kind of how Genesis lands. But, for the most part, it seems to be quite well received. Gilly's saying all books of the Bible are a multitude of books combined to make one book. Yeah, there's a lot of that going on, especially here in the early part of the Old Testament. So that's kind of what's going on. In terms of, the book of Genesis, we're going to start basically at the beginning of time. And what the beginning of time means can kind of depend on your interpretation. If you believe that the book of Genesis is like literal and you want to count back the years of all the genealogies, you're probably talking about a beginning of the book of Genesis that traces to like 4,000 to 6,000 years ago. And I have personally been to the Creation Museum, which is a museum dedicated to basically explaining and trying to scientifically justify a literal interpretation of the book of Genesis. In fact, I think the group that built it is called Answers in Genesis. And that museum will, make a case to you anyway that the earth is in fact about 4,000 to 6,000 years old. Now, if you believe that these are in fact just allegories that kind of tell the story of early peoples, you might believe that actually the earliest stories from the book of Genesis trace through the oral tradition to as much as like 10,000 years ago. And then they wind their way through stories all the way out to about the year 1800 BC. Somewhere between 2000 and 1800 BC is where the book of Genesis ends. So you're covering a lot of history within this book. Anyway, if you go to the Creation Museum, it's in Kentucky. It's a very interesting place if you want to learn about exactly how this might have literally played out. If there was like actually literally a creation story and literally the Garden of Eden and quite literally like answers these questions like did dinosaurs coexist with humans? And according to the Creation Museum, the answer is yes. I don't know, there's just these little placards in the museum. It's like, if dinosaurs and humans live together, why aren't their bones found together? And then that's like the Q, and then the A is like, just because their bones aren't found together doesn't mean they didn't live together. Maybe they just didn't like die in the same places, which, fair enough. Maybe they didn't die in the same places. Ken Ham is the guy behind the Creation Museum. He's also the guy that built the Ark Encounter, which is the giant life-size ark, trying to like literally interpret the language in the Bible about Noah's Ark, which we'll talk a little bit about as we dig deeper into Genesis as well. But very interesting stuff there down in Kentucky if you're ever going through that part of the world. Kyle's asking, we're going to feed the ducks again. Yeah, we're getting pretty close, guys. It's the weather's getting a little better. Very soon, we're about to hit March, which means we're about to get to like warmer weather, ducks, eventually ducklings. We're like 2 months away from duckling season. So ducks coming around again real soon, guys. In the meantime, of course, we're doing the Bible here. So anyway, welcome to everyone who is just joining us here in the chat. Again, you're watching Land Speculation on YouTube here as we're digging in. We did our first Bible stream last week. We're going to just try to crank away at these kind of gradually over time. We're not going to do these every night. We might space in some other content here as we go through, and we'll see how these are received over time. But at any rate, we're tackling the Bible here in the book of Genesis tonight. So anyway, welcome, guys. And just a reminder, if you haven't dropped a like or subscribe to the stream, I do always appreciate those likes and subscribes. And of course, the Discord is there, and the Duck Fund is there, and you guys know all that stuff. Genesis, probably mostly a book of kind of allegory. You know, think about like ancient people trying to sort of make sense of the world around them. I didn't have like big libraries and smartphones and all that stuff. It takes a lot to kind of make sense of the world. And actually, Genesis is pretty darn well organized. If you think about like just trying to sort of figure it out, like it makes pretty quick work of explaining the trajectory of the world. So that's pretty cool, actually. It's amazing. Like you start from literally nothing. And like within a couple chapters, you're ready to start talking about literal human beings that would have been alive like in relatively recent memory. And it all kind of adds up and fits together and kind of makes some sense of like, you know, why are humans the way we are and why is the earth the way it is? And it's all pretty creative, actually. Like, I think the Bible is does a pretty good job here with the book of Genesis. And I think it's one of the things generally through, researching these streams has been kind of recognizing that in fact the Bible does a pretty good job generally of organizing itself and kind of making heads or tails of, kind of how to structure basic understandings of the world. The other thing to keep in mind is when the book of Genesis, when these stories kind of started getting told as oral tradition, like the entire world, circa 10,000 BC, had more or less fewer people in it than the metropolitan area of Dayton, Ohio. So, there's that aspect of this, which is like you got to sort of keep in mind how these stories would have begun, by who, the resources they had at the time. And like there's a lot of wisdom that actually kind of went into evolving it and shaping it. Okay, let's dig in here, guys, because we did a lot of stage setting here in the book of Genesis. But I think for this book in particular, it's pretty important. It's pretty important. So, I'm going to dig in. Okay, and by the way, guys, I see comments here in the chat. I'm kind of following along here with you guys. As I said, I appreciate everybody sort of sending me. A lot of people have sent me different thoughts, different sort of favorite parts of the Bible and things like that. And, I really appreciate that because I think it's going to help richen some of the ways that we talk about some of this. The only thing I'd ask here in the chat, guys, I know, again, people are coming at this from different sort of levels of belief and whatnot when it comes to the Bible. As always here on Land Speculation, please just be respectful of each other's, relative perspectives here. Like a lot of things, this is sort of this is a big one. So, anyway, the book of Genesis basically has these two parts. The first part is like the beginning of humanity, sort of allegory of like how we all got to be here in the first place. And then it pivots about halfway through to the history of the early tribe of this guy Abraham, who kind of shows up sort of out of nowhere in the middle of Genesis, but he becomes like one of the most significant figures in the history of humanity, since he becomes sort of the forefather of like three of the world's most major religions, which is pretty remarkable when you think about it. So let's just kind of delve into this, tackling this kind of in the two parts. So the first piece, the beginning of humanity. How did we all get here to begin with? The beginning of the Bible is, of course, extraordinarily famous. The Bible starts here in the book of Genesis with the story of creation. And, of course, the story of the 6 days of creation, after which God rested. In the beginning, when God created the universe, the earth was formless and desolate. Or, in other versions of the Bible, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The raging ocean that covered everything was engulfed in total darkness, and the Spirit of God was moving over the water. Then God commanded, "Let there be light," and light appeared. God was pleased with what he saw, I mean, God's in like a pretty raw state here. Like, he's just like coming up with things here off the top of his head. Like, wow, like, let's just make something here. And if your project is to like create the entire universe, like, that's a pretty, talk about like, Silicon Valley, they talk about that, like, it's a white space, you got a blank whiteboard, you start writing things down. Like, this is like the biggest white space project of history. Gilly's asking what version we're using. So we've got sort of quotes from the Bible that I've compiled. We're going to sort of amalgamate different versions. We talked a little bit about the different versions of the Bible in the intro stream. For the purpose of sort of telling some of these stories, I'm not going to dwell too much on trying to be super precise and differentiated about the different versions. We're going to have some stuff in here from the New American Standard Bible, the King James, some of these kind of ones that are a little easier to read, that are kind of designed more in kind of lay text. We're going to kind of amalgamate some of these. So I haven't even notated at some points like which versions necessarily we're using, but we're just going to try to tell the stories as best we can with kind of what we've come up with. But I know everybody has their favorite version, to be clear. Anyway, so God creates light. Let there be light. Light appears. God's pleased with what he saw. Then he decides to separate the light from the darkness. And he names the light day and the darkness night. Now, this is interesting because like God hasn't actually created like the sun and the earth and everything yet. They start with just night and day. Everything passed and morning came. That was what God did on the first day. Doesn't sound like a lot, but when you're talking about the entire universe, I'm sure it takes a lot of resource matter and whatnot to do that. Day 2, God commands, let there be a dome to divide the water and keep it in 2 separate places. And it was done. So God made a dome, and it separated the water under it from the water above it. He named the dome sky. Evening passed and morning came. That was the second day. Day 2 is kind of one of the weirdest days in the creation story to me. But basically what God's doing is basically separating the sky and the water here on day 2. So you've got like light, you've got day, you've got night, you've got sky, you've got water. Then God commanded, let the water below the sky come together in one place so that the land will appear. And here I am. He named the land Earth. I thought the land was just called land. Okay, welcome to Earth speculation, guys. And the water which had come together he named sea. And God was pleased with what he saw. Then he commanded, let the earth produce all kinds of plants, those that bear grain and those that bear fruit, and it was done. So the earth produced all kinds of plants, and God was pleased with what he saw. Evening passed and morning came. That was the third day. So obviously there's like, there are aspects of this story. Maybe you could say the whole story that just kind of, like when you think about scientific explanations for how the universe came into being, that, there's obviously some things here that are allegorical rather than literal. But again, like sort of think about, you're just trying to kind of divide an understanding of like how everything works from scratch. Now, it's not doing a bad job of kind of taking it piece by piece, breaking it down, and just kind of explaining how it might have all come into existence. I think where things kind of get a little confusing here is the fourth day. So having already created day and night, on day 4 here, God commands, let lights appear in the sky to separate day from night and to show the time when days, years, and religions and festivals begin. They will shine in the sky to give light to the earth, and it was done. So God made the 2 larger lights, the sun to rule over the day and the moon to rule over the night, but he also made the stars. He placed the lights in the sky to shine on the earth, to rule over the day and the night, and to separate light from darkness. And God was pleased with what he saw. Evening passed and morning came the 4th day. So it's not really until the 4th day here that he basically sets up kind of the structure of like the planets, the sun, all that kind of stuff. You would think that's probably what he would actually do on day 1, but anyway, let's not parse too many details on all this. Day 5, God commanded, let the water be filled with many kinds of living beings, let the air be filled with birds. So God created the great sea monsters, all kinds of creatures that live in the water, and all kinds of birds. And God was pleased with what he saw. He blessed them all and told the creatures that live in the water to reproduce. I'm sure they had enjoyed that. And to fill the sea. And he told the birds to increase in number. Evening passed and morning came. That was the 5th day. So the animals are now here. And they're having a good time. We've created like Narnia at this point. And then we get day 6. God commanded, let earth produce all kinds of animals, animal life, domestic and wild, large and small, and it was done. So God made them all, and he was pleased with what he saw. And then God said, and now we will make human beings, and they will be like us and resemble us. They will have power over the fish, the birds, and all the animals, domestic and wild, large and small. So God created human beings, making them to be like himself. And that's a really important line, that God basically created man here in his image to be like God. And this is going to come up important again when Eve later on gets tempted by the serpent, because the serpent is offering Eve the opportunity later to be like God, but God already created humans to be like God. So God here has created humans basically to sort of reflect him. He blessed them, and he said, have many children, so that your descendants will live all over the earth and bring it under their control. So he's basically just telling Adam and Eve, like, go get busy. You don't have to really do anything here except, go have fun with each other, repopulate, make a fruitful species, and oversee the animals. Sounds like a good life. I'm putting you in charge of the fish, the birds, all kinds of wild animals. I have provided all kinds of grain and all kinds of fruit for you to eat. Wow. But for all the wild animals and for all the birds, I have provided grass and leafy plants for food. And it was done. This is like, when you're God, and I guess you have the power to control like all matter, you can just create things. It's very fun. God looked at everything he had made, and he was very pleased. Evening passed and morning came. That was the 6th day. I think it was Bequeathus here pointing out in the chat that this sort of story, the sort of sequencing of the story, reflects a lot of creation, kind of stories that were told at that time through a lot of different traditions. And, it makes basic sense. So the whole universe was completed at this point. By the 7th day, God finished what he had been doing, and he stopped working. He blessed the 7th day. He set it apart as a special day because, of course, on the 7th day, God needed to watch football. Because by that day, he had completed his creation and stopped working. And that is how the universe was created. And of course, later we read a lot of stories in the Bible in which it's not just like the 7th day was this sort of extra day. Like, God gets very serious about the Sabbath. Sunday is like a day when you're really not supposed to be working. It becomes a very serious thing. Sunday's the day to sort of reflect on God's creation and everything he'd done. And I'm sure, you make the entire earth. That's a lot of effort. Think about the amount of matter you have to move. And frankly, he set Adam and Eve up to have a pretty good situation here. Everything was going pretty well for them here at the outset. Which brings us to the Garden of Eden and Adam and Eve, which, what a place. What a place to live. So, this is kind of how the Bible begins here at the book of Genesis. And things start to get real pretty fast here. Everybody's sort of living in a paradise, and Adam and Eve have I guess, the option here to basically do what God asked, to be fruitful and multiply, and have purview over the animals, and have plenty to eat, and it sounds like retirement, But anyway, let's get into Adam and Eve here a little bit. So the Garden of Eden. When the Lord God made the universe, there were no plants on the earth, and no seeds had sprouted because he had not sent any rain. And there was no one to cultivate the land, but water would come up from beneath the surface and water the ground. Then the Lord God took some soil from the ground and formed a man out of it. So man is made of soil. He breathed life-giving breath into his nostrils, and the man began to live. Then the Lord God planted a garden in Eden in the east, and there he put the man he had formed. He made all kinds of beautiful trees to grow there and produce good fruit. In the middle of the garden stood the tree that gives life, and a tree that gives knowledge of what is good and what is bad. So God basically from the scratch setting up the tree of knowledge, which becomes obviously quite significant here in short order. Now, the book of Genesis talks about the Garden of Eden in some specificity. A stream flowed in Eden and watered the garden. Beyond Eden, it divided into 4 rivers. The first river is the Pishon. It flows round the country of Havilah. Pure gold is found there, and also rare perfume and precious stones. The second river is Gihon. It flows round the country of Cush. The third river is the Tigris, which flows east of Assyria, and the fourth river is the Euphrates. So there's a lot of detail here about the Garden of Eden, and there's actually been a fair amount of research trying to more or less place the Garden of Eden. And so researchers have best been able to deduce these are the potentially most likely locations of the Garden of Eden. Now keep in mind, again, almost everything that happens in the Bible, basically everything that happens in the Bible, is happening within a pretty small geographic area here. From very northeastern Egypt, basically across the Red Sea into Jordan, Israel, you get a little bit of, Lebanon, Syria. A lot of these places are very deserty, as in, vegetation is very much cherished in the desert, and so is water. And so the areas where things grow fruitfully are highly in demand. So you got to think about that as the context here for the Garden of Eden. But I guess based on the sort of geographic coordinates of what we're talking about, those who have tried to track down the Garden of Eden basically have placed it most likely either in eastern Turkey or in southern Iraq, which is kind of interesting placement because that city of Basra in southern Iraq, which is basically the first big port city in Iraq, which despite being a big desert country has only a really tiny little port with access to the Persian Gulf, is that was one of the major epicenters of violence during the Iraq War. I mean, I remember turning on the radio, we're always hearing about bombings and friendly fire and these sort of horrific stories that were happening in the vicinity of Basra. So if that in fact was the Garden of Eden, how far have we fallen? At least there's a lot of document saves around Turkey. This is sort of the cradle of civilization. I mean, this is a really important area of the world. Now, I've been to South Africa, and they have claims down in Africa about some of the very earliest human remains. That's sort of the what do they call that? The cradle of humankind. But in terms of a lot of the sort of early civilizations of the planet, I mean, this little nook here, sort of in the Egypt, kind of Israel vicinity, a lot of very, very, very old civilizations, a lot of the sort of very earliest development of human societies happen in this area. So this really is sort of a cradle of human civilization. Now, we don't know how much this Garden of Eden stuff is intended to be literal here in the Bible, or sort of how this story even came about with that kind of specific level of coordinates in what is otherwise a generally allegorical story. But, to sort of put you in context here, you can imagine a place that looks like this, and maybe at the time of the Garden of Eden it looked different, because God had sort of handpicked this place that apparently had it looks like flamingos and giraffes just kind of walking around here in the jungle. I don't think giraffes are generally jungle animals, but anyway, there's Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. So, the Lord God placed man in the Garden of Eden to cultivate it and guard it. He said to him, "You may eat the fruit of any tree in the garden, except the tree that gives knowledge of what is good and bad." So God is very clear here, and you see this a lot in the Old Testament. God starts to set some very clear instructions and boundaries for humanity. Now, I guess he's given humanity a free will here. It's sort of an interesting thing. Like, you create people, and then you give them free will to either, like, obey you or to sort of test their limits. So it tells man that, you shouldn't eat from the tree that gives knowledge of what is good and bad. You must not eat from the fruit of that tree. If you do, you will die the same day. Then the Lord God said, "It is not good for the man to live alone. I will make a suitable companion to help him." So this is an important part of the Genesis story here, because this is the part where God realizes that man maybe needs a partner, and so this is basically the part of the Bible where God creates woman. So he took some soil from the ground, he formed all the animals and all the birds, then he brought them to the man to see what he would name them. That's how they all got their name. So I guess he's creating the animals first. And the man has the opportunity to basically name all these things, which that's kind of a fun task, although I'm sure you run out of creative ideas pretty quickly. So the man names all the birds and all the animals. Not one of them was a suitable companion to help him, not even, I guess, the dogs. Man's best friend. I guess it took woman to become man's best friend here. Then the Lord God made the man fall into a deep sleep, and while he was sleeping, he took out one of the man's ribs and closed up the flesh. He formed a woman out of the rib and brought her to him. Then the man said, "At last, here is one of my own kind, bone taken from my bone and flesh taken from my flesh. Woman is her name, because she was taken out of man." So this is a pretty important thing. Obviously, this is the sort of allegorical story of how woman gets created here. And I think the whole sort of imagery of the woman kind of coming out of Adam's rib is a little odd, and I'm not sure quite what to make of that. There's some translation things going on here. One of the things that like I said, a lot of people sort of reached out to me with their thoughts. So I think it was James Dean reached out to me and made the point that there's this sort of these parallels that start showing up even sort of as early as the book of Genesis here. Woman comes out of man. This sort of man has this sort of human partner kind of comes out of his rib. Eve was taken from Adam's side and became his bride. His bride came out of his side. This corollary, when Jesus is on the cross later, he gets stabbed in the side with a spear. Jesus, in a way, was sort of the second Adam. And so the church is the bride of Christ. There's these kind of allegorical parallels that start showing up even this early in the book of Genesis. So, interesting things. Again, how much this is literal, up to interpretation. Anyway, woman is the name that I guess Adam names her. Woman is her name because she was taken out of man. Makes sense. That is why a man leaves his father and mother and is united with his wife, and they become one. The man and the woman were both naked, but they were not embarrassed. So if you've ever been embarrassed being naked, like if you've ever been a little apprehensive, back then I guess you would have been okay. Okay, now things start to get real. This is the part of Genesis where things start to get real, basically right out of the gate here. Because then we get to the sort of first story of human disobedience. And this is the story where this creature, the snake, comes into play. And if you've looked up like the imagery of what the original snakes were, because apparently the snake was originally this creature that could like walk around and stuff. It didn't slither on the ground. That wasn't until the outcome of the story of the snake. But these are some pretty freaky images of the early snake. So the snake was apparently the most cunning animal that the Lord God had made. So he made like the snake smart enough that I guess the snake could trick the people. It's interesting. The snake asked the woman, so I guess the snake can talk too. Did God really tell you not to eat fruit from any tree in the garden? And then Eve explained to the snake dutifully. We may eat the fruit of any tree in the garden, the woman answered, except the tree in the middle of it. God told us not to eat the fruit of that tree or even touch it. If we do, we will die. Speaking again about this tree of knowledge at the center of the Garden of Eden. God sort of put it there to tempt them. The snake replied, that's not true. You will not die. God said that because he knows that when you eat it, you will be like God, and you will know what is good and what is bad. So this is, again, the snake is sort of tempting Eve with this, like, if you want to be like God, eat from that tree. And it's such a sort of tragic moment in the entire trajectory of the whole story, because as we just kind of went through, God had already created man and woman to be in his own image. Like, they don't have to eat from the tree to get to become like God. God's already sort of created them to be reflective of God. But the temptation is too great. The woman saw how beautiful the tree was and how good its fruit would be to eat, and she thought how wonderful it would be to become wise. So she took some of the fruit and ate it. There's a picture of the fruit that she ate. This is always considered an apple, although the Bible does not say it's necessarily an apple. Then she gave some to her husband, and he also ate it. As soon as they had eaten it, they were given understanding and realized that they were naked. So suddenly, as soon as they've eaten this fruit, they become all apprehensive about being naked. And they sewed fig leaves together, and they covered themselves. That evening, they heard the Lord God walking in the garden, and they hid from God among the trees. And they kind of knew they messed up here. But the Lord God called out to the man and said, "Where are you?" The man answered, "I heard you in the garden. I was afraid and hid from you because I was naked." And this is like God's like, what's going on here? You're hiding from me. You're ashamed of being naked. You're not supposed to be any of these things. Like, you're supposed to be fine. You're supposed to have your innocence here. Who told you that you were naked? God asked. Did you eat the fruit that I told you not to eat? The man answered, "The woman you put here with me gave me the fruit, and I ate it." Man. Okay, so Adam is like pretty darn quick here to, throw Eve here under the bus. I don't know. Like, should Adam have covered for Eve here? I mean, I guess God would have known either way, but like, he's pretty quick to throw her under the bus. The Lord God asked the woman, "Why did you do this?" She replied, "The snake tricked me into eating it." So everybody's kind of passing blame here. Now God's like he's all thrown off here. This is not good. This is not a good situation. So God has to figure out what to do here. So God says to the snake, "You will be punished for this. You alone of all the animals must bear this curse. From now on you will crawl on your belly, and you will have to eat dust as long as you live. I will make you and the woman hate each other. Her offspring and yours will always be enemies. Her offspring will crush your head, and you will bite her offspring's heel." This is like one of the most important, really early allegorical things that shows up in the Bible. This is a super important kind of moment here, because there's sort of a duality to it. It's perplexing in a way. It's kind of odd language. So snakes and women don't like each other. I guess that usually bears true. Her offspring will crush your head, and you will bite her offspring's heel. So, a lot of sort of musing again. Is this sort of a foreshadowing, in a sense, of the story of Jesus Christ? That Jesus, in a sense, kind of comes back to redeem humanity. But then the snake bites the offspring's heel, that Jesus himself sort of gets his, bad fate that comes to him. But the snake is not the only one that gets punished here. Woman also gets punished because of this transgression. So God says to the woman, I will increase your trouble in pregnancy and your pain in giving birth. So I guess up to this point, like, you could just have sex all the time. You just made babies. You populated the earth. Everything felt great. But now, childbirth is going to be painful. And God's like being kind of sadistic here. This is like, it's tough because God says also, in spite of this, you will still have desire for your husband, yet you will be subject to him. So basically, this is like, God's sort of setting Eve up here because he's like, I'm going to make childbirth really painful for you, but I'm still going to make you really want sex with your husband. So, yeah, that's kind of, it's a sort of the balance you gotta think about this stuff, and like, how many problems that we have in society are caused by this sort of duality of, the responsibility, the sort of difficulties that come with raising kids, but also people getting sort of drawn into the appeal and the sort of ease of, the activities that make a child. Okay, God goes on. He said to the man, you listened to your wife and ate the fruit which I told you not to eat because of what you have done. The ground will be under a curse. You will have to work hard all your life to make it produce enough food for you. So maybe this is sort of how, like, maybe the Garden of Eden was actually very lush, and then after that, God turned that area into, like, barren desert as punishment. Basically, God says at this point, like, you're going to, the food's not just going to be plentiful for you. It's going to be hard. You have to work really hard. The ground is going to produce weeds and thorns. You're going to have to eat wild plants. You're going to have to work hard and sweat to make the soil produce anything until you go back to the soil from which you were formed. You were made from soil and you will become soil again. Sort of humbling, man. Man got this ego from eating this fruit, and now it's like, I made you out of soil. Well, now you're going to have to till this soil until the day that you die, and it's going to be hard. Everything about life is going to be difficult. In a way, it seems like a really intense punishment, especially since we all bear this, for the rest of human history. I mean, yes, we all have iPhones and stuff now, but like, life is still pretty hard. And it's hard simply because of this one thing that Adam and Eve did here at the very beginning in the Garden of Eden. As is sort of the case here in a lot of the Bible, these sort of like random little add-ons get added to these stories sometimes. And this story ends with a little passage that's kind of unrelated, but gives context. Adam named his wife Eve because she was the mother of all human beings. And the Lord God made clothes out of animal skins for Adam and his wife, and he clothed them. So they had covered themselves with plants. Now God is covering them with animals. God gave them like purview to sort of oversee all the animals. Now they have to get clothed by animals. Then the Lord God said, now the man has become like one of us and has knowledge of what is good and what is bad. He must not be allowed to take fruit from the tree that gives life, eat it, and live forever. So apparently they were just going to live forever. So instead they have to like live in this barren desert. They get kicked out of the garden. The Lord God sent him out of the Garden of Eden, and made him cultivate the soil from which he had been formed. Then at the east side of the garden he put living creatures and a flaming sword which turned in all directions. This was to keep anyone from coming near the tree that gives life. So Adam and Eve banished here from the Garden of Eden. So this is kind of the beginning of the Bible. The creation story, the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve. There's a lot we can sort of nitpick about this story. There are a few inconsistencies that show up in the way that Genesis sort of talks about the sequence of creation between the creation story and later passages. There's some proportionality issues here. Like, they ate the apple, but like, is that really worth making life really difficult for the entire rest of humanity? But you sort of look backwards on this. Like, people are sort of trying to figure out, like, why on the one hand are we as human beings so sophisticated and yet life is so hard? Like, why would God make it this way? Why isn't everything easy? Why can't we just have plentiful food? And so if you think about these stories basically as allegories to kind of help ancient humankind, explain their sort of sense of place in the world. These are explanations that sort of carry forward in a way. There's sort of a genius to them in a way, because they both sort of explain how we got here, and they also sort of establish these kind of rules, these covenants in a way that are going to govern all societies for all time, to kind of help keep humans in check, even moving forward. These sort of lessons like humility, this sort of relationship with God and sort of what God represents gets established here very, very, very early on. And so, again, like we've gotten pretty quickly from a situation where there was literally nothing in the world to now basically in 3 chapters understanding what man and woman are, our relationship to all the matter around us, and this complexity of life being both on the one hand glorious but also really difficult, a struggle in perpetuity. And there's sort of a genius to like be able to that quickly parse out the entire world at that level. You guys are watching Land Speculation here on YouTube, and I appreciate that you guys are here with us. We're delving in here to the book of Genesis tonight in part 2 of our, will probably end up being quite a few parts, Bible Stream series. I think a lot of the other books, as we get deeper into this, are going to go more quickly. But I wanted to sort of spend some adequate time here as we talk about some of the early stories, some of these really significant stories that kind of frame the entire understanding of what the Bible's about, and if you believe in the Bible, about what humanity is all about, before we delve in a little deeper. These are obviously famous stories. So we're trying to kind of dig in. I see people commenting here in the chat, and I know people have sent me a lot of messages too about their favorite and most interesting parts of the Bible. I appreciate that. Keep doing that. That'll help us kind of deepen these conversations as we go through them. I hope this is interesting. I'm always looking for feedback on kind of how to best do this. But we've talked about doing the Bible stream for a long time. We're now finally doing it. I think this is like super interesting. It's important. This is sort of the most important collection of stories in human history, whether you believe completely in them or not. And of course, we're tackling the allegorical stuff here at the beginning of Genesis first. So tonight we're sort of delving into the book of Genesis. We're going to get as far as we can with it and then see where we pick up the next time. But we appreciate you guys joining us. If you haven't dropped, again, a like or a subscribe in the video, I appreciate those likes and subscribes. The likes help us out with YouTube. The subscribes help you guys know when we're on. As always, our description has other links to our Discord and our Duck Fund and all that kind of stuff. So, do all that stuff. So far, we've given you guys basic background on the Bible. We've talked about the beginning of the book of Genesis here. We've talked about creation. We've talked about the Garden of Eden. We've talked about Adam and Eve and the fall from grace here. And basically kind of why life is difficult. And life doesn't get any easier. I mean, a lot of the rest of, there's 16 and a half more books here in the Old Testament that are basically just histories of early humans into the early Israelites. And nothing comes easily. It also like it establishes this dynamic that gets more and more complex here in the early Bible. God of the Old Testament is really hard to understand. Like, God, on the one hand, he's created the earth, he's created humanity, he's created all these animals, he's imbued sort of himself in them, and yet he has also shown that he's pretty serious when he sets rules. Like, why is he setting some of these rules? I think that's something we got to think about. Like, why did God tempt Adam and Eve with this tree? Like, why did he give them free will? If he was going to be so mad at them when they used free will for bad, like, why did he give them free will to begin with? Why did he tempt them? Like, why didn't he just not tempt them? And then once they did this, like, why was the punishment so severe? And why do the rest of us sort of bear the brunt of that? Like, why aren't just Adam and Eve punished? You think about it literally, it's a lot harder to explain if you're sort of thinking about it in a forward sense, as opposed to if you sort of try to think about your life now and sort of think about these stories as explanations for why things are the way they are today. I guess that's one of the big points here. Anyway, let's keep going, because God of the Old Testament gets more and more complex. early humans get kind of more and more, boy, what's the right word? They challenge God, they challenge each other, and a lot of the circumstances of the world start to emerge from these further stories here in what we can best assume is still kind of allegorical part of the book of Genesis. So the train continues here in the book of Genesis with some of these iconic early stories, and let's get through a few more of them. The next one that comes up here is the story of Cain and Abel. So this next sort of chapter in Genesis begins pretty abruptly here. So Adam and Eve had intercourse, or Adam had intercourse with his wife, and she became pregnant. Ta-da! Okay, so Adam has impregnated Eve. Eve now bears a son. So I guess now there are 3 humans on the planet. Second generation has now started. By the Lord's help, I have acquired a son, says Eve. And so she named him Cain. There's sometimes phrasings in the Bible where if you don't understand the full translation, there's these kind of inexplicable phrases. That shows up in some of the Gospels too. By the Lord's help, I have acquired a son, so she named him Cain. It seems like kind of a non sequitur, but anyway. Later she gave birth to another son, Abel. Abel became a shepherd, but Cain was a farmer. I mean, there are only 4 humans on the planet. Like, the professions seem awfully specialized. Anyway. After some time, Cain brought some of his harvest and gave it as an offering to the Lord. Then Abel brought the firstborn lamb to one of his sheep, killed it, and gave the best parts of it as an offering. So the very first thing that Cain and Abel are talked about doing here in the Bible is they each have to make an offering to God. And Cain basically brings plants. Abel brings an animal. The Lord was pleased with Abel and his offering, but he rejected Cain and his offering. Cain became furious, and he scowled in anger. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Why are you angry? Why that scowl on your face? If you had done the right thing, you would be smiling. But because you have done evil, sin is crouching at your door. It wants to rule you, but you must overcome it." So, I don't know, it seems like a little bit of an overstatement to call, offering some of your harvest to the Lord as evil just because it wasn't an animal. But this first passage here in the story of Cain and Abel underscores what becomes a really interesting point here in the Old Testament, which is God basically is pretty picky. He demands a lot of sacrifices. And he's very partial here. God loves the animals. I think a rule is kind of getting established here that once you get deeper into some of the stories of the early Israelites, God starts to get really specific on. And these rules have translated all the way into contemporary Judaism. Around the kinds of sacrifices that must be made, when they must be made, how they must be made, etc., etc. But it is important. Adrian Gutierrez says, Abel brought a lamb. Just like lambs slain, you have to understand this is important. Rainmaker says, Cain tried to pull one over on God. He picked his fruit from the ground, fallen from trees, not picked fresh. So, on the one hand, I guess you could say, why does God need any kind of sacrifice like this? On the other hand, you could say, God's done a lot for humanity to this point. You should be offering him your very best. And if you're trying to pull the wool over his eyes and offer him not your very best, well, then God's probably not going to be very happy with you. And that's what happens here with Cain and Abel in the early going. Okay, so then Cain says to his brother Abel, "Let's go out into the fields." And when they were out in the fields, Cain turned on his brother and killed him. So the whole killing of Cain and Abel happens in one sentence. And it's a little bit of a kind of hard to understand the context sentence here. But it's sort of in the aftermath of God basically excoriating Cain. But Cain's not happy here. So Cain turns to his brother and kills him. And I guess this is a picture of Cain killing Abel with a rock. The Lord asked Cain, "Where is your brother Abel?" I think the Lord probably knows what's going on here, but he wants people to fess up. But Cain does not fess up. He says, "I don't know. Am I supposed to take care of my brother?" So Cain's kind of being like a smartass here to God. Then the Lord says, "Why have you done this terrible thing? Your brother's blood is crying out to me from the ground, like a voice calling for revenge. You are placed under a curse and can no longer farm the soil. It has soaked up your brother's blood, as if it had opened its mouth to receive it when you killed him. If you try to grow crops, the soil will not produce anything. You will be a homeless wanderer of the earth." Wow. So again, you're sort of seeing the vengeance of God here, but, there are... Now, Cain and Abel probably, this is sort of allegorical at this point, like, they're probably not the only children that Adam and Eve have here. In fact, we know they're not. But they're the only 4 people that have been mentioned in the Bible thus far. And so the idea that Cain has now killed like one of the 4 people that God has made possible is a pretty significant thing. And that he has disappointed God by lying to him and by basically trying to pull the wool over his eyes by offering him an inadequate sacrifice. You understand God is mad, but you also see a lot of vengeance here from God. And this is something that becomes recurring. Cain doesn't like this punishment, though. He says, "This punishment is too hard for me to bear. You are driving me off the land and away from your presence." That's interesting from Cain. It's like, you're just going to make me more angry. "I will be a homeless wanderer of the earth, and anyone who finds me will kill me." So Cain is worried here. But the Lord answered, "No, if anyone kills you, 7 lives will be taken in revenge." So the Lord put a mark on Cain to warn anyone who met him not to kill him. And here is the mark of Cain. Famous thing. Cain went away from the Lord's presence and lived in a land called Wandering, which is east of Eden. So humans are starting to spread out here a little bit. Humans are starting to show sort of real emotions here. Fear, doubt. The Lord does not like when people doubt him. Even in situations where people are subjected to hardship at the hands of the Lord is challenging people basically to trust in him. There's this sort of battle of egos that sort of manifests repeatedly in the Old Testament, in which, God basically gives man an edict, and man, at first kind of obeys, then eventually gets a little bit full of himself, challenges God. God slaps him down as punishment, and then man gets angry at God for punishing him. And the sort of challenge, like one of these challenges that you're sort of confronted existentially with is like, what is the relationship with God? Who's really at fault here? And what God's, I think, challenging you to do is like, there's this sort of, you've always got to kind of acknowledge that there is this force that is sort of bigger than you. It created you. It knows more than you. And probably all the suffering you're being subjected to is for a reason. And it's tough. That's like that's a really tough part of the Bible generally, I think, for people to reconcile. Like, there are a lot of things in the Bible that seem and feel really unfair. Later on, we'll talk about the story of like the prodigal son. These stories in the Bible just feel really unfair, and trying to sort of understand and reconcile in your own mind. It's difficult. And there's a lot of struggle. I mean, I think what's sort of interesting about the Bible is it's so well organized. In a way, some of these allegorical stories explain so much so quickly. Now, you can doubt a lot of the literal historical accuracies of this early stuff, and, granted. But there's a sort of a fluidity to it. But at the same time, it's a real grappling, gnashing set of relationships between humans and God. I see a lot of people pointing out that this is, not actually the mark of Cain. We don't actually know what mark he got. Yes, mark of the beast. So they say. Okay, so Cain and Abel are pretty significant. We're starting to establish some real human emotions. This is where the Bible starts to kind of, like, we're in this sort of weird pivot point at this point in the Bible, because we've done some really big allegorical stories that flow very cleanly. This is when we start sort of pivoting back and forth, and this is why, like, it's pretty clear the book of Genesis is an amalgam of a lot of different things. And it's kind of hard to sometimes make sense of it. But this is where things start to get very odd, because we're not sure if it's trying to be allegorical. We're not sure if it's trying to be a literal historical record, or quite what exactly is going on here. And it's probably a mishmash of both in a way, because again, a lot of this was being passed on through word of mouth, and probably people wanted to keep track of a few different things, one of which was, these sort of iconic stories, but also, some of the legacy of their descendants or their ancestors. And so after Cain and Abel, we just basically like delve into a bunch of really extensive genealogies about the descendants of Adam. And the Bible just, like, it can get extraordinarily tedious in a way. This is a list of the descendants of Adam. And then the Bible clarifies, when God created human beings, he made them like himself. He created them male and female, blessed them, and named them humanity. When Adam was 130 years old, he had a son who was like him, and he named him Seth. Imagine having a kid at 130. I mean, I don't know, guys. I mean, having a kid at 130. After that, Adam lived another 800 years. Because that would have been, Eve was also about 130 then. I guess we don't quite know who the mother was. But if it was Eve, I mean, that's impressive. After that, Adam lived another 800 years. He had other children and died at the age of 930. So what you will find a lot here is that there is, a description of years, particularly here in Genesis, that is probably some kind of mistranslation, some kind of exaggeration, something meant to sort of explain a level of virtue in people. But maybe people just lived a really, really, really long time back then. Anyway, Adam lived to 930. When Seth was 105, he had a son, Enosh, and then lived another 807 years. He had other children and died at the age of 912. When Enosh was 90, he had a son named Kenan, and then lived another 815 years. He had other children and died at the age of 905. When Kenan was 70, he had a son, Mahalalel, and then lived another 840 years. He had other children and died at the age of 910. When Mahalalel was 65, he had a son, Jared. These names kind of go back and forth from being long and hard to pronounce to being, like, short and easy to pronounce. Jared lived another 830 years, had other children, died at the age of 895. So he didn't live to 900. When Jared was 162, he had a son, Enoch, then lived another 800 years. He had other children and died at the age of 962. When Enoch was 65, he had a son named Methuselah. Very significant figure in the Bible here, Methuselah. Enoch lived in fellowship with God for 300 years and had other children. He lived to be 365 years old. He spent his life in fellowship with God, and then he disappeared because God took him away. Did God just kidnap him? When Methuselah was 187, he had a son named Lamech, and then lived another 782 years. He had other children and died at the age of 969. These genealogies go on for a really long time. Again, I started doing research for this by trying to basically just listen to the Bible as like a series of audiobooks. And when you get into some of the genealogy and rules chapters, it can become very hard to stay focused because you get these long, long passages of genealogies. I think it actually gets tougher when you get into a couple of the later books where God starts describing all these really meticulously detailed descriptions of rules for how to build these, the temple and the tabernacle and all this stuff. A lot of detail before you get back into other stories. When Lamech was 182, he had a son and said, "From the very ground on which the Lord put a curse, this child will bring us relief from all our hard work." And so he named him Noah. Lamech lived another 595 years. He had other children and died at the age of 777. After Noah was 500 years old, he had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. So this first set of genealogies basically is the bridge to the next great allegorical story here at the beginning of Genesis. And that story, of course, is the story of Noah and the flood. We're going to delve into Noah and the flood here. Before we do, though, let me take a quick pause here. And I'm going to click at random on one of our commercials. I'm going to take a quick pause here. You'll hear from one of our moderators.
Hi, Quiet Castle here. I hope you're enjoying our interactive chat. If you like hanging out with us here on YouTube, just a reminder you can continue the conversation over on our Discord. It's a fun place to hang out. We have questions of the day, you can post links and memes, post photos, debate things, and chat with your fellow land ducks any time of the day or night. It's also a great place to interact with the mods and with Land directly. It's free to join and easy to use. You can open it right up in your browser, so give it a try. The link to join is in the description.
All right, guys, we are back here on Land Speculation on YouTube. I guess that was Quiet Castle, moderator extraordinaire here on Land Speculation. We appreciate, as always, all the work of all of our moderators, as well as everything that you guys bring to the table here. And again, like a lot of people have reached out to me with their thoughts on the Bible. I know this is a point, like the Bible is a book of tremendous significance to everyone, but like really tremendous significance to a lot of people who believe very deeply and sort of rely on the Bible as like a source of inspiration and guidance in life. And we're trying to sort of tell these stories in a way that is both acknowledging of the sort of real depth and complexity and meaning, explanation of the world that sort of comes, but also kind of, having some fun with some of the kind of bizarre little details and oddities and contradictions that show up along the way. Like, I hope you guys, we're trying to do it sort of in the land speculation way here. So, we hope you guys kind of bear with us as we go through this, trying to make this entertaining. But, we certainly appreciate you guys reaching out to us. Please keep doing that. If you got thoughts on, as we kind of get through later chapters and books and whatnot, please reach out to me. Let me know your thoughts. I know people have said, like, this is my favorite book of the Bible. Here's why I like it. I love that kind of stuff because it kind of helps me orient. But yeah, we appreciate the civil conversation here. And hopefully this is interesting. Guys, I want feedback. Should we be moving faster, slower, all that kind of stuff. Obviously, these are some big stories, so we're trying to kind of take these methodically here out of the gate. We can't tackle everything. So as we kind of get into the meat of the Bible, we're going to move a little faster through some of these books. But anyway, we aren't going to do this every day, but we hope it's interesting. Yeah, so anyway, like and subscribe and all that stuff. Thank our mods along the way. So, let's do a little bit more here. Noah and the flood. Another big story, like big stories, like one after another, just popping here in Genesis as we try to like explain the world here. Noah and the flood. Okay. Human wickedness. When the human race had spread out all over the world and the daughters were being born, some of the heavenly beings saw that these young women were beautiful, so they took the ones that they liked. Like angels just taking the young women. Then the Lord said, I will not allow people to live forever. They are mortal. From now on, they will live no longer than 120 years. So you had all these people that got to live like 900 years. Not anymore. In those days and even later, there were giants on the earth who were descendants of human women and were heavenly beings. They were the great heroes and famous men of long ago. But when the Lord saw how wicked everyone on earth was, and how evil their thoughts were all the time, he was sorry that he had even made them and put them on the earth. So God's like going through a bit of an existential crisis here. It's like, I put in all this work. I made these really sophisticated people, but like they're kind of not doing what I said, and I gave them free will, and they're using it for all these bad purposes. God was so filled with regret that he said, I will wipe out all these people that I've created, and also the animals and the birds, because I'm sorry that I made any of them. But the Lord was pleased with Noah. So God seems to be going through like a depressive streak here. But Noah is like the chosen one here at this point. And, over time, there are these sort of chosen figures that pop up for various reasons. Noah gets his time to shine here. Later you'll see Abraham kind of comes up in the same vein. Later Moses kind of comes up in the same vein. But anyway, Noah gets sort of picked out of the blue here. This is the story of Noah. He had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Noah had no faults, literally no faults, and was the only good man of his time. What a remarkable pronouncement. Imagine having that like on a plaque. He lived in fellowship with God, but everyone else was evil in God's sight, and violence had spread everywhere. Man, it's like Summer of Love. God looked at the world and saw that it was evil, for the people were all living evil lives. God said to Noah, I've decided to put an end to the whole human race. Imagine getting that announcement from God. I will destroy them completely because the world is full of their violent deeds. Build a boat for yourself out of good timber, make rooms in it, and cover it with tar inside and out. Make it 133 meters long, 22 meters wide, and 13 meters high. Make a roof for the boat and leave a space of 44 centimeters between the roof and the sides. Build it with 3 decks and put a door in the side. I'm going to send a flood on the earth to destroy every living being. Everything on the earth will die, but I will make a covenant with you. Go into the boat with your wife, your sons, and their wives. Take into the boat with you a male and a female of every kind of animal and every kind of bird in order to keep them alive. Take along all kinds of food for you and for them. Noah did everything that God commanded. What a thing if you're just a guy, you're just like Noah, and the Lord suddenly comes to you and is like, I'm gonna just wipe everything out except for you, as long as you do what I tell you to do. Go build this gigantic boat of these very specific, precise dimensions, and then load onto it one of each gender of every animal in the entire universe. Man, it takes some serious faith to listen to this and be like, okay, God, that makes sense. I'm going to go out and rather than farming these fields in this difficult life that we all have, I'm going to go devote all my resources and personal energies to building this enormous boat in the middle of the desert where there is no water for seemingly no reason. And this all comes into a little bit of specific context. If you ever visit the actual Ark encounter, there is this, again, Ken Ham, this guy down in Kentucky, has built, based on those directions in the Bible, a literal full-scale replica of what Noah's Ark would have been. This is the boat that Noah would have had to have made, at least according to Ken Ham. Again, at a time when you don't have any industrial construction abilities or anything, this is a pretty gigantic thing. This boat is it's 510 feet long. And, just like Noah would have, I guess, had to experience, the boat basically is built on land. There's nothing around it in terms of water. And I'm sure to the people who knew Noah at the time, it would have seemed rather inexplicable why he was doing this. He did this by hand, I guess, with the help of his family. I guess he had to assume the boat worked, that all the seams were sealed and that the thing would float. And I mean, man, this is when you walk up to the Ark encounter. The Ark encounter is literally the full-scale replica of Noah's Ark. You park in a giant parking lot, you take a big bus, like 20 minutes to go actually up to the area where the ark is. And you walk to the ark, they have like these giant queuing areas. And then inside the ark, basically they have parsed out in a way where basically you see the cages that would have been used to store one male and one female of every single animal that was in existence at the time. Everything from, I guess, dinosaurs to, lions and tigers, to gorillas, to house cats, to dogs, to chipmunks, down to birds and toucans and springboks, and even like the bugs. I guess you would have had to have male and female wasp, male and female gnat, male and female fire ant. They're probably a little bit allegorical here. You got to think. I guess these are dinosaurs. I don't know. Did the dinosaurs miss the boat? I'm not sure. Not sure exactly how that went down, but I don't know. When you see it in person, Ken Ham, he does his best to sort of interpret this language from the Bible and try to make some decisions about what's included and what's not. And then he built it. He built the model, and you go see it. I was like, wow, this probably would have been a lot of work. And they show these little videos at the Ark Encounter where all the other people at the time were mocking Noah, and Noah's like, no, I have faith. God told me to do this. He's established this covenant with me. God wouldn't be wrong. And this is God said, we've run into issues here with Cain and Abel and Adam and Eve. You got to obey God. When God tells you to do something, even if it's a little out there, best to obey God. And Noah's Ark is sort of the proof of that, because Noah does something that in other contexts would be completely and utterly inexplicable. And this is an important lesson, I guess, to people, because you've seen the follies of not obeying God, and now you see a little bit of the reward of obeying God, come through in Noah here. The Lord said to Noah, "Go into the boat with your whole family. I have found that you are the only one in all the world who does what is right. Take with you 7 pairs of each kind of ritually clean animal, but only 1 pair of each kind of unclean animal. Take also 7 pairs of each kind of bird." This is, there's a lot in the Old Testament. It's inexplicable a little bit why God is so frickin' specific in some of his directives. God's both a big picture guy and a real micromanager at times. He is very specific. Do this so that every kind of animal and bird will be kept alive to reproduce again on the earth. 7 days from now, I'm going to send rain that will fall for 40 days and for 40 nights in order to destroy all the living beings that I have made. And Noah did everything that the Lord had commanded. On top of this, Noah is 600 years old when this is happening. This is not like God's going to some young, virile, fit guy. Noah is 600 years old when the flood comes. It probably would have taken him a long time to build the boat, so I guess it would have taken a while. Anyway, Noah's 600 years old when the flood came. He and his wife and his sons and their wives went into the boat to escape the flood. A male and a female of every kind of animal and bird, whether ritually clean or unclean, went into the boat with Noah, as God had commanded. 7 days later, the flood waters came. And I guess that's what that looked like when the flood waters came. When Noah was 600 years old, on the 17th day of the 2nd month, all the outlets of the vast body of water beneath the earth burst open, and all the floodgates of the sky were opened, and rain fell on the earth for 40 days and for 40 nights. On that same day, Noah and his wife went into the boat with their 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and their wives. With them went every kind of animal, domestic and wild, large and small, and every kind of bird. A male and a female of each kind of living being went into the boat with Noah, as God had commanded. And the Lord God shut the door behind Noah. The flood continued for 40 days, and the water became deep enough for the boat to float. The water became deeper, and the boat drifted on the surface. It became so deep that it covered the highest mountains on the entire earth. It went on rising until it was about 7 meters above the tops of the mountains. Every living being on the earth died. Every bird, every animal, and every person. Everything on the earth that breathed died. The Lord destroyed all living beings on the earth, human beings, animals, and birds. The only ones left were Noah and those who were with him on the boat. The water did not start going down for 150 days. So it rains for 40 days, but then he just leaves the water there for 150 more days. So, there is certainly a level of God being extraordinarily punitive. God has declared that Noah is the only good person on the entire planet at this point. I don't know. Wouldn't you think there would have to have been somebody else that didn't deserve to get completely wiped out? I remember being a little kid, and this was a really compelling story. When I was a little kid and I was in school, we had this older lady that used to come, and she used to use little figurines. She would act out Bible stories on these little rugs as everybody sat in a circle around her. And a lot of the stories, are a little detailed to kind of understand as a little kid. The whole Noah's flood, the ark, is one that I think even from a pretty young age you could understand. And it becomes compelling in a way. I remember having this sandbox. And, you'd build the ark, and this is one of the earliest Bible stories I kind of remember understanding and being able to take some of the messaging from. It's also scary, I think, that at any moment God could go and destroy everything. And that's part of, I guess, the message from this is at any moment, if God decided that too many people are being evil, he's going to make you pay. And only the righteous might be spared. And while it might be tempting to question that, it's probably not fruitful to do so. If Noah had quarreled with God about well, why are you going to kill everybody? It seems like overkill, doesn't it? Things might not have gone as well for Noah and his family and for the animals he took with him. There's also a lot of, presumably innocent animals that get killed in this flood. It's sort of there's a lot of kind of history chasing when it comes to some of these early stories. Of course, we talked about Ken Ham and the Ark Encounter. There are a lot of historians that have tried to sort of, explain that there actually were there's an instance of a really giant flood about the time when, that would sort of fit into the historical lineage of these stories in Genesis. And that wasn't probably the entire earth. That's probably an exaggeration. But there was some big flooding in this sort of cradle of humanity back at the time. And, maybe this story is sort of an outgrowth from some of the experiences that happened at the time. Okay. Eventually the flood does end. God had not forgotten Noah and all the animals with him in the boat. He caused a wind to blow and the water started going down. I can only imagine when the water goes down. You've ever try to walk across a field after a big storm, how waterlogged everything is. Can you imagine? The outlets of the water beneath the earth and the floodgates of the sky were closed. The rain stopped and the water gradually went down for 150 days. This water presumably was 30,000 feet high, if it was covering Mount Everest. There's there's not the ability to have probably that much precipitation that can just go away in an instant. But, again, we're parsing details. So the water goes down for 150 days. On the 17th day of the 7th month, the boat came to rest on a mountain in the Ararat range. The water kept going down, and on the first day of the 10th month, the tops of the mountains appeared. After 40 days, Noah opened a window and sent out a raven. It did not come back, but kept flying around until the water was completely gone. Meanwhile, Noah sent out a dove. And this story of Noah and the dove is a significant one. Since the water still covered the land, the dove did not find a place to alight. It flew back to the boat, and Noah reached out and took it in. He waited another 7 days and sent out the dove again. It returned to him in the evening with a fresh olive leaf in its beak. And that olive leaf was proof to Noah that the water, in fact, had gone down. He waited another 7 days and sent out the dove once more. This time it did not come back. Presumably it found land. And now I have a dove. When Noah was 601 years old on the first day of the first month, the water was gone. Noah removed the covering of the boat, looked round, saw that the ground was getting dry. By the 27th day of the second month, the earth was completely dry. And so God said to Noah, "Go out of the boat with your wife, your sons, and their wives. Take all the birds and all the animals out with you so that they may reproduce and spread over all the earth." So Noah went out of the boat with his wife, his sons, and their wives. All the animals and the birds went out of the boat in groups of their own kind. Noah subsequently built an altar to the Lord because, of course, there's got to be a sacrifice of appreciation here. Because even though God killed the entire earth, he did save Noah and he cleansed the earth here. So Noah built an altar. He took one of each kind of ritually clean animal and bird and burnt them as a whole sacrifice on the altar. I'm sure they enjoyed that. The odor of the sacrifice pleased the Lord. Burning meat, I guess. Said to himself, "Never again will I put the earth under a curse because of what people do." So, I don't know, God's, I guess, learned a lesson from this. He's like, boy, that was a little much. Drowning the entire earth to 30,000 feet. God's like, I'm kind of figuring this out, Maybe that was a little overkill. As long as the world exists, there will be a time for planting and a time for harvest, says God. There will always be cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night. God blessed Noah and his sons and said, "Have many children so that your descendants will live all over the earth. All the animals, birds, and fish will live in fear of you. They are all placed under your power. Now you can eat them as well as green plants. I give them all to you for food." This is sort of a rebirth of the Garden of Eden happening here after Noah's flood. "The one thing you must not eat is meat with blood still in it. I forbid this because the life is in the blood. If anyone takes human life, he will be punished. I will punish with death any animal that takes a human life. Human beings were made like God, so whoever murders one of them will be killed by someone else. You must have many children so that your descendants will live all over the earth." And, now we have 9 billion people, so I guess it worked. God said to Noah and his sons, "I am now making my covenant with you and with your descendants and with all living beings, all birds and all animals, everything that came out of the boat with you. With these words I make my covenant with you. I promise that never again will all living things be destroyed by a flood. Never again will a flood destroy the earth. As a sign of this everlasting covenant which I am making with you all and all living beings, I am putting my bow in the clouds." So, this is the rainbow, famous rainbow, the sign of God's covenant with the world. So, across the Old Testament here, God establishes numerous covenants with humanity, one of which is the rainbow. We'll get into some of the other covenants that emerge here in a bit. "Whenever I cover the sky with clouds and the rainbow appears, I will remember my promise to you and to all the animals that a flood will never again destroy all living beings. When the rainbow appears in the clouds, I will see it and remember the everlasting covenant between me and all living beings on the earth. That is the sign of the promise which I am making to all living beings." And so that's the story of Noah. It is a sort of rebirth of humanity here. And then after this beautiful story of rebirth, of sort of really, these are big titanic stories. No pun intended there. Again, then we sort of pivot back and we do a bunch of genealogies. We get extensive discussion of Noah's descendants, and we're not going to go through that, but pages and pages and pages of genealogies. And then we get one more sort of allegorical epic story at the end of the book of Genesis. Not the end of the book of Genesis, the end of the first part of the book of Genesis. The sort of allegorical beginning of the book of Genesis. These stories that are sort of designed to kind of help us as human beings understand our place in the world. We get creation, we get the Garden of Eden, we get Adam and Eve, we get the fall. We get Cain and Abel. We get the story of Noah. And then we get sort of one more big epic tale here. And this is another tale that sort of emerges here of God kind of creating this thing, being really optimistic, watching it go about its business, and sort of realizing that humans will perpetually disappoint him. So God makes Adam and Eve. They disappoint him. Cain disappoints him. Noah doesn't disappoint him, but humanity sort of in the era of Noah had disappointed him enough that he destroyed all of humanity. And then once more, humanity disappoints God again. And each time God has to sort of reconcile, like, how do I deal with this? And each time the punishment is a little bit much. God's exploring different punishments here, which is interesting. But then he eventually sort of like settles into some kind of reconciliation, some kind of understanding, some kind of new covenant with humans. The last piece of this, of course, is the Tower of Babel. This one's a little shorter. It's also, interesting story. And another story that sort of explains another facet of why the world is the way it is, why we have different languages. At first, the people of the whole world had only one language and used the same words. And I guess God gave them those words. As they wandered about in the east, they came to a plain in Babylonia, and they settled there. Again, Babylon's also here in the desert. They said to one another, "Come on, let's make bricks and bake them hard." So they had bricks to build and tar to hold them together. They said, "Now, let's build a city with a tower that reaches the sky so that we can make a name for ourselves and not be scattered all over the earth." So, we did a stream a long time ago on Thomas the Tank Engine, the children's series, all the characters in it, and the sort of recurring lesson that occurs in that series about hubris and how hubris is like, in a way, like the ultimate of human failings. Pride, the idea that people sort of get out, get more confident than they should be, and that always gets them into trouble, and they always have their comeuppance. Well, once more, this happens story after story after story after story here in the Old Testament. Humans are getting a little bit too big for their britches, a little bit too full of themselves. They have free will and they have ego, and they start disobeying God. So they want to build this giant tower, and everybody gets together, and it's like, wow, what a cool thing. We're going to build this humongous tower. And this, I guess, was before like steel rebar and all these technologies that we can use to build these giant towers now. So you can imagine the amount of resources they had to put into this. And it took a lot of coordination, I'm sure, between a lot of different people. Lord thought this was interesting. He comes down to see the city and the tower which those men had built, and he said, "Now then, these are all one people, and they speak one language. This is just the beginning of what they are going to do." So God's getting like scared. I mean, rather than looking at this and being like, wow, what a remarkable creation, God's like, uh-oh, these people are starting to challenge me. Soon they will be able to do anything they want. God is feeling threatened here, I guess. "Let us go down and mix up their language so that they will not understand one another." So the Lord scattered them all over the earth, and they stopped building the city. The city was called Babylon because there the Lord mixed up the language of all the people. They're kind of non sequitur. And from there he scattered them all over the earth. So this is how people, I guess, scatter across the planet outside of this small geographic area where the Bible focuses. So a couple, these are sort of allegorical explanations for like, why are there people everywhere? Why are there different languages? Interwoven with another story about hubris, about people getting kind of too overconfident again. It's the kind of story you make up when your kid asks you, why do people speak different languages, and you don't have a really good answer. There's a lot of that here, I think, to these early stories, and that's probably, frankly, where a lot of them emerged. Just trying to figure things out. There's nothing wrong with that. Like, if you're going to be Ken Ham and try to interpret them completely literally, I mean, there's a path to do that. But you can also look at these just as sort of allegories of people in a sort of ancient time trying to build a society and trying to sort of interweave explanations for why things were the way they were with also trying to establish kind of a code of morals that can govern what are obviously flawed creations, human beings. We have all kinds of foibles. And at the same time, we have free will and things we can use to make good choices. And, the sort of idea of God, a God that sort of has created us and loves us, but also has rules for us, was probably very helpful at the time. Anyway, basically the language gets scattered all over the earth. People get scattered all over the earth. Then they followed up with a whole bunch more genealogies, which kind of takes us to the end of the first part of the book of Genesis, the sort of allegorical beginning. Now, it is sort of worth thinking about in relation to the Tower of Babel. People try to create this giant tower, and all this sort of imagery of the tower like reaching up to the sky, beyond the sky. I don't know. You wonder what God might think about, the last 100 years. The human population in the last 100, 150 years has exploded. We have cities today that are infinitely bigger than even the biggest cities were a few hundred years ago. The famous stories about like Shakespeare's London. London was like a tiny city by contemporary standards. We now have giant cities. 130 years ago, we didn't have towers more than like 10 or 12 stories. Now we have skyscrapers that are enormous. We have giant LED screens all across Times Square. We have people fornicating in the streets. We have big mascots dressed up. We have people playing music all over the city. We have cars rumbling through and emitting greenhouse gases all over the place. What would God think of our contemporary society? We've created all these creations. And these days we literally have towers. This is Dubai. The Burj Khalifa, the tallest building in the world, built in 2008, literally has 50 or 100 stories above the cloud line. We literally have built the Tower of Babel. So, I don't know. Is God proud of us? It takes a lot of, intelligence and ingenuity and coordination. And, we're getting to the point where, you have enough technological tools. Languages are hardly a barrier anymore with, Google Translate and AI and whatnot. Are we pushing our limits here as humans? Are we going to get burned? We are Noah's generation part 2. People were trying to find their own salvation, trying to leave God out of the equation, says Adrian. Yeah, we've seen a huge decline in religion across the world. We have all these sort of secular belief systems popping up. People sort of treating their political beliefs and whatnot almost as sort of a stand-in for religion. I don't know. What are we supposed to make of this? What do you think God thinks of this? Are there parallels between what we are going through today in society and maybe what's shows up here early in the book of Genesis? There's a lot of wisdom in the book of Genesis, whether it's literal or not. There's a lot of wisdom here in the early part of the book of Genesis. Maybe these are just allegories to kind of explain the beginning. But, pride cometh before the fall. One of the most important lessons here, I think, from early Genesis. But we are learning about God's relationship with humanity. We are learning about what God wants from us. We are learning a lot of things here in the early part of the Bible. And so the next part of the book of Genesis is going to sort of put an end to these titanic allegorical epics that begin the Bible. And so with this understanding of the dangers of hubris and the importance of obedience and the importance of virtue, we're going to sort of pivot. And we're going to sort of move from the beginning of humanity and the sort of stories about how we all got here to something that gets a little bit more literal. And that's the early history of the tribe of Abraham, the people that become Israel, as they make their way through the desert, kind of grow out of a single family, become the kind of originators of 3 different major world religions, ultimately became the Israelites, the recipients of some of the most important and epic rules that God establishes for all of humanity, and the descendants of great civilization. There are 16 and a half books that delve into the evolution of the tribe of Abraham. We're not going to go through every facet of all of them in meticulous detail. I think that would be probably a little bit much. But we will come back, and we're going to talk about the early history of the tribe of Abraham and where Genesis makes its pivot here between the early allegories and what seems like, at the very least, even if it is still allegorical, what feels a little bit more like literal history, and the following of the history of this single tribe. Why did God follow this single tribe? Why did he select Abraham? Well, again, think about it sort of retroactively. If you were the Israelites and you're in, like, I don't know, the year 500 BC, you're trying to sort of track your own lineage, these are the stories you would have told kind of about how you and your people, your tribe, your chosen tribe began, and how that tribe connects back to these early covenants with God. And so on our next edition of the Bible Stream, we're going to pivot to the second half of Genesis and talk about the history of the early tribe of Abraham. Things are going to get real fast. We're going to talk about literal people, literal human stories that feel a little bit more believable, perhaps, in a sort of regular sense. We're going to move a little faster. We're going to kind of pick up the pace and start really delving into what I find in some ways is in some ways it's the most interesting. In some ways it gets a little tedious. The historical epoch of about 1,500 years of evolution of the Israelites as they make their way through the desert. So that is going to be next here on the Bible Stream. And when I say stream, I really mean streams, of course, because we're doing this in several different parts. Yeah, we're going to see where this goes, guys. And I'm curious, obviously, for feedback on this. I know because we've been doing this a little bit as narrative, we've tackled fewer comments as we've gone along than maybe we normally would on a stream. But I think that will probably pick up a little bit as we get into some of these other ones where we got to sort of figure out our way through them a little more. So again, I appreciate people reaching out and offering their thoughts, people sending messages to me. What these stories mean to you, what your favorite books and stories are. Again, we can't do everything, as we said, but we're trying to tell these stories in as much depth as we think makes sense. So, we'll get back into it. And by the way, guys, I just see there's several folks here in the chat that I didn't have a chance to greet as we were greeting people early on. Tilt, Rainmaker, Adrian, Jerry Carter, Calming the Chaos, and many others here. Timmy Tushu, James Dean. I can't remember who I greeted and who I didn't earlier. Jay Luther. Anyway, lots of folks here. John Celeste is here. Anyway, I didn't mean to miss anybody if I have. David Miller is here too. We'll also be interspersing, obviously, some other content too, because I know the Bible Stream is not probably for everyone. We also have, news. We were just, if you missed our extensive debate on the Discord around the question of the day was the epic debate over wheels versus doors. Are there, in the entire world, are there more wheels or are there more doors? It's a thinker. It's a thinker when you start really thinking about how many of each kind of thing. So it's my challenge to everyone here. If you're looking for something to do between now and our next stream, I want people to do an audit of their houses. In your house, count them up. Every kind you can think of, not just the big doors, not just the big wheels, but you're sitting in a rolly chair, how many wheels? You got drawers in your cabinets, how many wheels are they rolling on? You got doors in all kinds of places, your refrigerator door, your cabinet doors, your door to the laundry machine. There's doors all over the place, too. Are there more wheels or are there more doors in your house? I'm very curious, because this debate was heating up on our Discord. Adrian says more doors. I don't know, guys. Do a count. Do a count. And let me know. Let me know. Tilt says, thank you. This was fun. I'll share my 2 cents in the next live stream. Yeah. Yeah, please do, guys. Share your thoughts here in the chat as always. And again, if anybody feels like reaching out, if he's like discontented with the way we're tackling this stuff, then let me know. Let me know that too. I mean, obviously, we're going to do the best we can here, but I'm always open to feedback. Yeah, Tilt is our winner tonight. Congratulations to Tilt. Yeah, well deserved, well deserved. So yeah, bring your 2 cents. Now you have 2 cents. Minus the cost of your postage stamps, I guess. Make it an imaginary 2 cents, if you will. James Dean lives in a cardboard box, does not have any wheels or doors. I mean, if you're living in it, I guess the flaps of the cardboard box could be considered your doors. It's kind of a fine line. I don't know where the exact cutoffs are between wheels and doors, Some of these things are thinkers, of course. And I don't know the exact answers, for sure. But, if anybody actually does want to do a count, I'm interested. Check your house. I was doing my best to count the doors and the windows where I am right now. Yeah, James, you're going to have to make an executive decision here on whether the flaps count as doors or not. Well, we got through a lot. We still only tackled the first half of the first book. Again, Genesis is a big one, but we'll keep plugging away. And by the way, there's news out there too. I'm gonna make a call, guys. I'm gonna drop this in here at the very end. I'm gonna make a call here. Trump's vice presidential nominee. Who do you guys think it's going to be? Maybe I'll save it. Maybe I have it in mind. I'm going to tell our moderators who it's going to be so they can corroborate if I'm right. We'll follow up on a stream. We'll probably intersperse some non-Bible streams here as we go. But I am pretty sure who I think Trump is going to pick here for his vice presidential nominee. And I'm willing to stake another hat on this. Rainmaker's house has more doors. Donald Trump cloned himself so he could be his own VP. That would probably be his preference. I mean, I think there is a world in which he makes one of his kids VP. I could see that. But I think I have a pretty good idea of who it's going to be. Maybe we'll save that for teaser for non-Bible stream upcoming. We need a Venn diagram of doors. I don't know if there's a whole lot of... I mean, yes, there are... I guess there are... Like a car has both doors and wheels. There are doors that roll on wheels, like closet doors. Or are those wheels on door? I don't know. I don't know how that works. Where you have wheels, you often have doors, and that gets a little confusing, overlap. The Doors were also a band. Were there 4 of them? 5 of them? How many doors were there? I don't think there's been a band called The Wheels. Although that would be a good band name. At least back in the 70s, that would have been a good band name. There were 4 doors. So it's like a sedan. Tilt is suggesting Tulsi Gabbard, Christy Noam, and Carrie Lake as potential VP. Interesting choices, Tilt. Interesting choices. I will not tell you yet whether my inference aligns with yours, but stay tuned for a future stream. I'll let you guys know. Jeanette's saying Vivek, possibly. All right, guys. It is late. I got things. And so I'm going to wrap this up for now. I'm going to leave the stream on for just a little bit if you guys want to keep chatting. But as always, again, I appreciate the conversation here. I hope these Bible streams are interesting. We'll continue to evolve this series based on feedback. And I do appreciate, as always, the likes on the video. If you haven't done that, please do that. Please do subscribe to our channel. Check our description for links to our Discord, as well as our Duck Fund. If you want to donate and support the stream, I always appreciate those contributions as well. Please thank our mods. We've got great mods here on Land Speculation on YouTube. I think we had Jeanette Quack Castle Bequeathius in the house here. Monica also lurking around at times. So appreciate you guys as well for the conversation, for being, just kind of part of our family here on Land Speculation. Tell your friends. If you've got people that you think would find this content interesting, please tell them. Please spread the word. Post about us. We'd love to have more folks in the fold, and you guys are part of this, so please help us out. Anyway, guys, we're gonna be back. I can't tell you exactly when, but we will be back. Just please stay tuned. Don't be strangers. This is Land. That ain't just speculation. For now, I hope you guys all have a good night.